Let's bring in Maslansky and Partners President Lee Carter, District Media Group President Beverly Hallberg, Fox News contributor Steve Hilton, California GOP Chairwoman Jessica Milan Patterson, Democratic strategist Kevin Walling, and RNC spokesperson Elizabeth Pipko. Elizabeth, to you first. I'm just kind of dovetailing off of what Caroline was just saying there. If you're in the RNC, if you're trying to run the RNC, what's the strategy? Does it change after tonight's performance from Joe Biden? Does the strategy change if, for some reason, the candidate changes?
It's a good question, but no, our strategy does not change no matter who the candidate is. We know that President Trump is the only option for Americans this November. I think what we saw tonight was a really rough night, truly, for anyone who isn't named Donald Trump. It was a rough night for Joe Biden. It was a rough night for the American people who had to watch their commander-in-chief barely make it through 90 minutes. And it was a rough night for the Democrat Party, who got caught red-handed, basically lying about who it is that's been running this country for nearly 4 years now. And the problem here, Trace, is that the American people are going to watch as the Democrats have to scramble now to try to see what to do moving forward, whether they replace Joe Biden or not. That's what's going to be on their mind. And winning this election is all they're going to focus on for the next 5 months until the election. And who is going to suffer? Who is going to be ignored? Again, the American people, which unfortunately is a common theme with this administration.
Yeah, it's interesting, Steve Hilton, because the wonder now is, and you can speculate because you're going forward, you know, the New York Times headline and, you know, the Drudge headline is already up there, like there's a mad dash to replace Joe Biden. And you wonder, who's the name? Who are the names? And how do you do it?
Well, it's a nightmare for them because you've got two front runners, as it were. You've got Gavin Newsom, who we all talk about, but Kamala Harris, the vice president, would be the natural person. But she, according to the polling and anecdotally, does even more poorly than Joe Biden in some settings. Gavin Newsom hasn't actually been tested particularly. That's why it was so disastrous for them not to have a primary. The other names that are mentioned, Gretchen Whitmer and so on, I mean, these people haven't been through the rigors of a contest where we can see how they perform in front of the key audiences in the swing states. And there's another name that we shouldn't rule out, because I can imagine somewhere in this country someone called Hillary Rodham Clinton is warming up tonight. I don't think she's given up hope of being the nominee and eventually the president. But you've got to look at all that and think, as Elizabeth was saying, it still favors, even more so than before, Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's amazing because he was talking about Gavin Newsom. You clearly are the head of the California GOP, Jessica, and you wonder, Gavin Newsom's approval rating here in California is 44%. In deep blue, far left California, 44%. And you wonder if he would make a viable national candidate.
Well, certainly he's been running a shadow presidential campaign for a very long time now. Between his visits to red states, his international trip, he spends very little time actually governing the state of California. But the time that he has, he's really run our state into the ground. And for Democrats, I think this would be disastrous. For everything that Americans are feeling right now, Californians felt it first and they felt it worst. Whether it's gas prices, the housing crisis, the homeless crisis, unemployment, California tops all of the wrong lists. And Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris have both been leaders in this state.
I wonder to you, Beverly Hallberg, because, you look at the headlines and you saw immediately Politico came out with their damaging headline and Drudge came out with the headline, and the New York Times was less damaging, but it was still a pretty good stab at Joe Biden. I'm wondering if the media kind of reconsiders tomorrow or stays on this path. What do you think?
I really think it matters what the Biden campaign does and what other Democrat leaders do. Now, here's the tricky thing for Joe Biden. He has run on saving democracy. So if the Democrats try to push him out, are they circumventing the votes of the Democrats in the primary? It becomes this very tricky thing of whether or not Democrats can actually get Joe Biden to step down. And I think Republicans have to ask themselves this. Would they prefer Donald Trump to run against Joe Biden than any other Democratic candidate? Republicans may actually think Donald Trump has a better chance against Joe Biden, especially after this primary. So there's a lot that comes out of this debate. I think it's such a pivotal moment. And I think many in the media are really going to follow the Democrat line.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's Lee Carter. You do this. You work the numbers. A lot of that you were talking about your focus group earlier. And I'm wondering if they wait until some of the first major polls come out before they make any decision. And if there is a dramatic drop, do you think that's when the decision, maybe 6, 8, 10 days down the road? Or do they wait for the convention if there's any decision to be made?
there's so much polling that it was already done. I mean, before this debate, only 30% of Americans felt that Joe Biden was fit for another 4 years. I think there was a lot of concern about that, and a lot of people tuned in to this debate to try and figure out, was he? And the focus group participants I talked to tonight, the voters, they were really concerned about it. And he didn't do anything to allay or alleviate their fears. So I don't think that they need to wait to see polls, but I don't really believe that Joe Biden is going to go anywhere. And I think that Republicans really should be careful about what they wish for, because if he does go somewhere, I think it might be harder for Donald Trump, because as great of a performance as he had tonight, and he did do very well, there were some people who were very frustrated with him. He didn't answer questions that people were hoping that he would answer. There are a couple of questions that he didn't satisfy the voters with. So it's not going to be just such a straight line. And so I think we have to be really careful about what we wish for.
I wonder, Kevin Walling, if you're kind of in that camp where you're like, listen, I know you've said it a couple of times on this show tonight. Yeah, I get it. Joe Biden had a bad night, but it was just one night. And I'm wondering, if someone was calling you for advice, would you say, listen, we got to ride this thing out because it's going to get better as the days go on?
Listen, I'm a member of the Democratic Party. What we love to do, Trace, is just constantly wet our beds and complain. We've got the presidency. We've got a guy that defeated the former president by 8 million more votes just 3.5 years ago. To Lee's point, the former president dodged a lot of those questions, doubled down 3 times, failed to answer if he would accept the election results. Beverly brought up the issue of democracy and preserving democracy in her response, and we know from Fox News polling that's actually the number one issue.
We're going to work on Kevin's microphone. Did we get it? Yeah, we're going to work on your microphone, Kevin. Stand by, if you will. Back to Elizabeth Pipko,
sure.
Okay? Elizabeth, I'm kind of looking forward to this thing. And let's just assume that everything stays the same. Let's just assume that we go forward and Joe Biden stays in, Donald Trump stays in. At the very least, tonight benefits the former president of the United States. Fair?
Very fair, yes. Look, President Trump has been leading in all swing states. We're putting states like Virginia and Minnesota in play, and all of that was before tonight's debate, right? It was before the Democrat Party basically admitted in front of the entire country that they have a serious problem. The American people obviously saw that. They probably share that sentiment. There's a huge problem in that party, and there's a huge problem in our country because this has been our commander-in-chief, for 4 years now, and the only answer is to elect Donald Trump in November.
Yeah. Would you concur with that, Steve Hilton?
Well, I mean, it's very evident that they've got a massive problem on their hands, and it's very evident that Donald Trump, he was already the favorite, exactly as we've heard. He's been leading in the swing states, right, leading or tied in the national polls. Even before this was the favorite. And now, I mean, Kevin talks about that bedwetter comment. Earlier this week, I actually moderated a discussion with James Carville and Kellyanne Conway, and James Carville said before tonight's debate, if you're not a bedwetter now, then you're stupid. Yeah. In his inimitable fashion. Right. I don't know what he would say tonight after this, but it's a real problem for the party because they've left it so late to find an alternative. That's why you see this panic.
And I wonder if you talk strategy here, Jessica Milan Patterson, and you look at the battleground states, because the battleground states and, the polling, the tight polling does not bode well for Joe Biden, as Steve was saying, even before tonight. You go into Pennsylvania, you go into Wisconsin, you go into Minneapolis or Minnesota, and you go into, even to some extent, Arizona and Nevada, and it doesn't bode well for Joe Biden. And then you think this is going to wreck some of those chances.
Tonight was a huge night for President Trump, but also the last 3.5 years have been. When you see mortgages up 90%, eggs, bread up 40%, baby food up 28%. This is a problem that has been caused by President Biden in the last 3.5 years from day one when he started with his executive orders. We have an opportunity in November to make sure that we bring our country back, and I think Americans are going to do that with Donald Trump.
Yeah.